Our recording is now started. So obviously this session is being recorded, and the recording will be placed up on our Vimeo site, vimeo.com/Team Cireson. Probably by the end of the week. I'll get it recorded this morning, and then off to the ladies to get posted up to our website. But anyway, thank you all for taking an hour or so out of your busy days to spend a little bit of time to listen about what's new in Configuration Manager Current Branch Build 1702. My name is Wally Mead. I'm a Principal Program Manager with Cireson. I've been with Cireson just over 3 years now, had my third anniversary just earlier this month, after spending 22 years at Microsoft in the Configuration Manager product group. So I've been around the product for quite a while now, and trying to stay up to date with it, and that's what our topic of our presentation is on. So just a couple little quick housekeeping items. You guys are in listen-only mode, so you can't unmute and audibly interact with the webinar. However, if you do have questions you want to ask or any comments you want to make, go to the questions panel in your GoToWebinar panel, and you'll see the questions area, and you can go ahead and type up your questions or comments there. I'm going to try not to look at that throughout the presentation because it will distract me, but I will go ahead and refer to those and try and answer as many as I can at the end of the presentation. I gave this presentation a couple different times the other day, once in the US and once for Australia, and I know in the US we actually had a half an hour's worth of questions after our presentation, so if you can stick around for the questions afterwards, you may hear some good information there, and if not, then of course you can always grab the recording and get to that later on. So I will just caution you, if you do ask questions, please put some context around them. Just don't type in a question saying why not, because by the time I get to looking at the questions at the end of the presentation, I won't know what you mean by why not. So you can give me a page number or the slide, or just what topic I'm talking about when you ask your question. That'd be fantastic. All right, with that, let's go ahead and jump in. Again, you should be seeing my screen and obviously hearing me properly. Just a couple of slides on who Cireson is before we jump into the real meat of the presentation. Cireson is a company that's been around for a little over 5 years. We started as a consulting company doing services around System Center, a lot around Service Manager actually. And as part of that work, we found a lot of usability gaps in the Service Manager technology, so we started creating some free apps to help enhance some of those usability gaps, and we found that was very popular with our customers, so we got more and more into the application of the software business for Service Manager, and that's what this first little area on the screen in the lower left is talking about: service management, to help the administrator with gaps in Service Manager or the end user, including a web portal for Service Manager. We then started doing some work in asset management, allowing you to take your configuration manager data, for example, and pulling it into the Service Manager CMDB to allow you to provide some context around those assets. Cost centers, locations, contracts, licenses, financial information, and so on. And over the past year and a half or so, we've started creating some applications around Configuration Manager. We have 4 free applications available to you today, as well as we just recently released our first web portal for Configuration Manager, called the Cireson Portal for Configuration Manager. And if you want to get information about that, you can email us at team@cireson.com. We have a team there in the UK that handles the EMEA region, and they can help you with setting up a demo or a trial of that. There's also webinars up on our Vimeo site that we've done on the Configuration Manager portal. Here you can see just some basic information about the company. We've got over 1,200 customers spread throughout the world in 63 different countries, and a lot of consulting hours, which again, it was where our company started, and we still do a lot of consulting today around around System Center, as well as our product technologies. And we're very, very pleased with our renewal rate of 99%. That means our customers who sign on with us, they really appreciate our technologies and the interactions with us, and they find good value with them, so they renew their support and maintenance agreements. And some of the awards we received down at the bottom of the slide over the past year or so. And here you can see a few of our fans or some of our customers in very different technology areas, whether it's education or government or healthcare or sports or IT, retail, a lot of different varied segments of the marketplace where customers are utilizing Cireson technologies. And lastly, where we fit into the environment is the vast majority of our products sit on top of System Center and revolve around System Center. For example, the Configuration Manager portal would sit above System Center Configuration Manager and interact with it. So our technology sit above System Center, which could be hosted in your own environment in an on-premise environment using Hyper-V or physical servers, or could be in a hosted environment such as Microsoft Azure. And as far as we're concerned, it doesn't really matter. We think you might get better support and functionality and ease of use out of your environment without having to do the physical management of the infrastructure in a hosted environment such as Azure, but our technologies work the same in either boat. All right, so now what we're talking about today is what's new in Configuration Manager. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to do a review of the previous releases of Configuration Manager Current Branch. And the reason I do that is whenever I'm at a conference, such as I was in Europe a few months ago at the Nordic Infrastructure Conference, then did a bunch of tours after the fact. I've been in a lot of user groups. And I was in Australia a month ago for Experts Live. Whenever I'm at events, I poll the audience to find out who's still running ConfigMan 2007 or ConfigMan 2012. And there are always a couple of hands that go up around the Configuration Manager 2007 platform, and a few more hands that go up around the ConfigMan 2012 platform. So I want to show you all the different benefits that you have access to when you make the migration or the move to Configuration Manager, the current branch technology. And even if you're already on current branch, I still find a lot of people that might be, let's say, on 1606, but they don't know all the features that were there or things that came in 1511 or 1602. So I'm doing a quick little review of those. I'm not going to hit everything, but just a couple little highlights for each of the different builds. And then, of course, we'll concentrate our time on the 1702 releases. That's the most recent. And I think it's 9 different slides about things that were added to the product as of 1702. So let's jump in. And again, if you have questions, feel free to type them into the questions panel, and I'll get to those at the end of the presentation. But please feel free to submit your questions at any point in time. Okay, so when Current Branch came out about a year and a half ago when it was first released, the most compelling reason that people would look at going to Current Branch over their existing ConfigMan 2007 or ConfigMan 2012 platforms, outside of just wanting to have something new, was the area around Windows 10. So if you were a company that was in an organization that was moving to or implementing Windows 10, your best bet for deployment and management of that Windows 10 infrastructure was going to be Current Branch. And again, we're talking about 1511 at this point in time, and obviously it goes forward. But you had full management of Windows 10 in Current Branch, which meant all the features of Configuration Manager were implemented and available for your Windows 10 environment. You had the ability of doing an in-place upgrade of operating system deployment. So if you're in Configuration Manager 2007, you could manage Windows 10 as a client using the core features, but there was no OSD support of Windows 10 at all. In ConfigMan 2012, you had that same client support, and you could do a fresh install of Windows 10, such as a bare metal or a rip and replace scenario, but you couldn't do an in-place upgrade. And Microsoft's recommended way of getting to Windows 10 is actually through an in-place upgrade. So in ConfigMan 2012, there was some offline code or out-of-the-box code you could download from the product group that would kind of hack up Config Manager to let you do in-place upgrade. But this is native in the box that very easily allows you to do an in-place upgrade from Windows 7, for example, up to Windows 10. You also had a servicing node that would let you look at the different platforms or versions of Windows 10 you had, whether you have 1507, 1511, 1607, or now even 1703, as well as creating servicing rings or servicing plans to allow you to keep those different environments up to date with new releases of current branch or current branch for business of Windows 10. Another cool feature that people really liked was the ability of adding your management points to your boundary groups. So this is a great way for those of you that have remote locations, and you could put management points out in those same locations where you probably had distribution points already, and have your clients tied to those management points and not having to worry about placing secondary sites there to get those clients to utilize those management points in that same boundary group where those clients were residing. So this is a great start at the ability of removing secondary site requirements. A couple other things real quickly, more complete Microsoft Azure support. So you had a couple of little, I call them dorky scenarios in ConfigMan 2012 where Azure was supported, but now you have complete Azure support intermixing your hierarchy or your site configuration between Azure and on-premise. And then the bottom bullet is a fantastic new feature of Configuration Manager Current Branch, the ability of self-maintaining Configuration Manager. So the ability of seeing or finding out automatically about new builds of Configuration Manager without having to follow somebody's Twitter feed or watch some website or monitor some blog and then going and finding that service pack or cumulative update and downloading it yourself. Now it was a very simple process. Configuration Manager itself would find out about that new release, download it automatically, extract it into your environment, download all the prerequisite components, and then tell you there's a new build available. You just have to launch off a real quick little wizard, and in possibly half an hour, you're all done. Your site was upgraded, and then you can upgrade your clients. Very, very cool. And of course, there's a lot of other reasons to move from 2007 or 2012 up to current branch, but those are just some of the highlights. Then, about a year ago, the product group released 1602. So 1602 was the first build that would use that updates and servicing feature and allow you to do your upgrade from 1511 up to the 1602 platform. So one of the cool little things in that is the first bullet there, the client online status. You guys all know if you go to Configuration Manager Console, you go to your Assets and Compliance workspace, you go to Devices, you have that column or that attribute you could look at was client activity, and it would tell you whether your client was active or inactive. Well, that's just telling you that your client has talked to the Configuration Manager site in the last X number of days, and by default that value was 7 days. So that's not very accurate as far as who's really on the network now. So this is a little icon or indicator that would appear by each device and letting you know if that device had talked to your management point in the last 5 minutes. So much more accurate as to who is really on the network or not. So just a quick little thing, and I'll show you that in my demo that I have coming up. The next cool thing was that the product group was announcing the support or lack of support called Deprecation for Windows Server 2008 and Windows Server 2008 R2. And they found through the telemetry data that a lot of people were still utilizing it. So they wanted to extend that support for a while. But what they did to help alleviate that was offered support for the in-place upgrade of your site server from Windows Server 2008 R2 to Windows Server 2012 R2. So the site server's operating system could do an in-place upgrade to get up to a more current operating system. And you'll see in 1702, when I get to those slides, that they actually have deprecated support now for Windows Server 2008 and 2008 R2 in most cases. The start of clustered system support. So the ability of treating multiple different computers in a specific manner for patch management. And I'll talk more about that later on because it's changed from the 1602 release up to the 1702 release that we'll look at. And some things about Windows 10 management, whether it's device health attestation reporting through the cloud service or changes to those Windows 10 servicing plans and rings. The start of Office 365 update management, some new settings in endpoint protection, as well as some updates into the Microsoft Intune integration with Configuration Manager. Okay, then last summer, the product group released 1606 as a build. Lots of updates there. A number of them revolved around Software Center. So Software Center now had the ability of, and again, this is the user interface for end users to go to find software targeted to them as a user or their computer as a device. So you could do a list view versus a tile view. So if you kind of think about this as File Explorer, Windows Explorer, where you have the details view or larger tile icons or thumbnails, and you could switch between those. You had one tab to view your installed software, separate tabs for from operating systems and software updates, as well as just software applications, including packages. The ability of multi-selecting your software updates or doing an install all as an end user. And a cool feature, the ability of you doing a sync policy action. So that would go and force a machine policy retrieval and evaluation cycle, as well as an end user policy retrieval and evaluation cycle. Instead of the end users having to go to Control Panel, System and Security, Configuration Manager, Actions, and initiate those two actions manually. So some cool changes there, and some improvements to the update and servicing feature to make it easier for you to track your updates to the Configuration Manager product. The top one on this slide is very cool as well. The ability for you to go find your content status much more easily. So in the past, when you were looking at a package or application or image file or software update packages, and you wanted to check the content status, you would look at the lower right-hand corner when you look at that content, click Content Status, and it would take you to the monitoring workspace, distribution status, content status, but it was the entire list of your content. So you'd have to filter or search through that content to find what you're looking for. So that was a little cumbersome. So now, when you click the Content Status link, it takes you directly drilled into that specific piece of content you're looking for. So a nice little thing that's been asked for a long time. The product group had never gotten around to it. The on-demand switching of software update points. So let's say you have multiple software update points spread around your environment and you're using a group policy or some sort of local setting to go ahead and tell clients which software update point to use. Well, let's say you get notified from operations manager or some analyst that the WSUS server sitting in your data center has gone offline. You could proactively go to a collection of clients that were utilizing that software update point, let's say all your data center computers, and force them to switch to a new software update point. By default, the automatic switching of software update points happens after 2 hours of failures. So the client tries to talk to the software update point. If it gets back one of a specific set of error messages, and it does that for 4 consecutive cycles of 30 minutes each, so 2 hours, it will then go and switch to a different software update point. But now you could proactively tell it to do that. So more things around health of your environment. So you could take the Windows 10 Health Attestation service and implement it on-premise. You could integrate with Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection to find out about breaches post-breach time. There are a bunch of changes in OSD to support customized RAM disk TFTP block sizes on your Pixie DPs. When you're doing an operating system deployment task sequence, you could either force a scan for software updates interactively, or you could have it use a cache set of results and not have to go through the process of doing a software update scan, because that can take a while. There were some improvements to the install software updates task sequence step for scanning. It'll give you better logging so you know what's going on and what logs are referred to and so on. And the OSD preserved drive letter task sequence step was deprecated because it was no longer necessary, because it could be done via the console now. Okay, the 1606 build was also when the product group first introduced something that they referred to as pre-release features. So pre-release features are features that are beyond what, if you're familiar with technical previews and what their benefit is, they're beyond that level of quality, but they're not quite ready for prime time, is the way I term it. So the product group wants you to test these features out. They put them in production, but they want you to test them out in a limited scale, not necessarily blowing it out to your entire infrastructure. So that's just a way of letting you look at some features that are in the production environment, but again, aren't ready to be thrown out to the masses. Now, because these are in your production environment, but they're not quite ready for prime time, you actually have to consent or agree to the use of pre-release features in your production environment. And until you do that consent, those features don't appear, you can't utilize them in your console. Now, after the consent, these features do become available, and I'll show you how to do your consent and turn on those features in the demo. Now, one thing to be aware of is that you cannot deconsent or unconsent. So once you've consented to utilizing pre-release features, you're always going to have the ability to do that. You don't have to consent again. But you do still have control over which of these pre-release features are turned on in your environment. And again, I'll show you how to do that in a little bit. As of 1606, the product group introduced 3 pre-release features: a connector for operations management suite that would let you see your collections in OMS, conditional access for configuration manager clients to not allow them to be compliant in your environment, thus getting access to all your corporate resources like email until they meet certain criteria like Bitlocker enabled, specific antivirus software installed or patches installed, and so on. And then server groups. Server groups was the renamed feature that we talked about in 1602 called clustered systems. And they moved it from a production feature in 1602 to a pre-release feature in 1606. They renamed it and they added some new features to it. So that's why they moved it to the pre-release. And again, I'll talk more about that. I'll actually do a demo of that when we get into the demo. Now, one more thing before we move on to 1610. In the 1606 time frame, now 1606 came out in July of last year. In September, I believe it was, Microsoft released System Center 2016. And you know Configuration Manager is part of System Center. So when System Center 2016 came out, they wanted a build of each of the different technologies. So the Configuration Manager product group wanted to put a build of Configuration Manager current branch in there. So instead of putting the 1511 build in there, they decided to make 1606 a baseline build and included that as part of System Center 2016 release. It's not Configuration Manager 2016, it's just Configuration Manager 1606 as a baseline build, which meant you could migrate directly from ConfigMan 2007 to 1606, or you could do an in-place upgrade from 2012 directly to 1606. You didn't have to go to 1511 and then do the updates and servicing feature to 1602 and 1606 or directly to 1606. So it made it easier for you to move forward. All right, now 1610, and I'll hit the vast majority of these because it was not that long ago. So in November of this past year, the product group did release 1610, and a lot of new features went in it. One of the ones I like to talk about because it basically impacts everybody, or it has the potential to impact everybody, is boundary group changes. So you guys all know what boundary groups are for. They're to designate your distribution points that clients in specific areas have access to. And now again, as of 1511, we talked about the fact that you can put your management points inside those boundary groups. Well, you guys all know also that boundary groups have the concept of a fast connection to a DP or a slow connection to a DP. And when you're looking at your DP properties, you have the ability to designate that this is a fallback DP. Well, those concepts, fast and slow and fallback, go away as of 1610. So now what happens, if you implement nothing here, it works, or it should be implemented the exact same way that you're used to from the past. But if you want more control over how soon your clients might expand their scope of distribution point access from their base DPs in their boundary group, then you can implement these new changes. So what you would do, and I'll show you this in the demo coming up, is you would go to boundary groups, you would go to the boundary group properties, you would go to the relationships tab, which is new, and you would create a relationship between the local boundary group and some what's now referred to as a neighboring boundary group. And in essence, you would say, I want my clients, the clients in this local boundary group, to search for the content on their local DPs, the DPs in that boundary group, for X number of minutes. And after that X number of minutes has expired, if they haven't found the content, they can now search for that content on DPs from this neighboring boundary group. So again, expanding the scope of the distribution points they have access to for content. Or you could even say, never fall back, so never access this distribution points from this other boundary group. So it gives you much more control over when that fallback type behavior would occur. And again, I'll show you that in the demo coming up. The ability of excluding clients via a collection from automatic client upgrade. I think automatic client upgrade is fantastic. It's my preferred way of upgrading clients when I change my configuration manager current branch build. And you already have the checkbox to disable or to prevent the automatic upgrade of servers if you wanted to, but now this gives you the ability of ignoring or excluding a specific collection of that automatic client upgrade. For example, maybe you have a collection of e-commerce servers, so web servers that are doing your business for you, ordering online and so on. Maybe you want more control over when those clients upgrade. So now you can exclude that collection so that you would have to do a manual upgrade and control the upgrades of those clients in that collection more closely. Some new dashboards for software update compliance that I'll show you, Office 365 management, upgrade analytics, and then client data sources. So client data sources is a new dashboard that ties along with the pre-release feature called the Client Pier Cache. And I'll talk about that in the next slide or a couple of slides. The ability of controlling your Office 365 client agent, the management of it, telling the O365 agent you're going to be managing it through for software updates through Configuration Manager as opposed to through Office 365. And the beginnings of the support for Windows 10 Express updates. And that was the start of that feature support, and it grows in 1702 that we'll talk about. Some new changes in Software Center. Indicators for new items. So when you load Software Center, it would have an indicator that says this is a new item from previous loads of Software Center. If you were doing the application approval process for applications, in the past you had to use the application catalog to go request that application, submit a reasoning or justification on why you think you need this application. You can now do that from Software Center. Customizable branding in Software Center. So you've always been able to go in there and change the organization name from the default of IT organization to something else. But if you had enabled the application catalog website role, in there you can give it a company name as well as choose a color scheme, and then that will flow through to Software Center. If you happen to integrate a Windows Intune subscription with Configuration Manager in what's termed a hybrid configuration, then in there you could actually associate a bitmap or a company logo with your Intune subscription, and that company logo or bitmap would flow through to Software Center as well. And the ability of having what's now called high-risk notification reminders. So I equate this to Microsoft Outlook, and I'm sure the vast majority of you are familiar with Microsoft Outlook. When a meeting pops up 15 minutes before it starts, you get a snooze button. You click the snooze button, that the reminder goes away and pops up again 5 minutes before the meeting starts by default. So that's what this is, this high-risk notification reminder is kind of a snooze and remind me feature. Another cool feature is the grace period before implementing required applications, or required deployments, really. And the scenario here is I go on holiday, so I turn my computer off and I'm gone for 2-3 weeks, whatever. During that time frame, the company has deployed a lot of mandatory or required software, whether it's software updates, whether it's packages, applications, whatever. So I come back from holiday, turn on my PC, get logged in, start doing email, and just then the Configuration Manager client starts up, it retrieves all these policies, and now it starts getting really, really sluggish because I've got all this mandatory stuff that I missed when I was on holiday. So this grace period allows you to designate a grace period in a period of time, number of hours, that when a client gets booted back up after a period of time and it's missed some mandatory deadlines, This grace period will give you a time that you can utilize your computer before all this mandatory stuff really kicks in and has to get implemented. So it lets you catch up on your email and do some work before all this mandatory stuff pops in and you can't use your computer for a while while that stuff happens. So kind of cool. Remote control keyboard translation. So if I'm sitting on a US keyboard and I'm remotely controlling somebody from, let's say, Russia, I can type in English and it appears in Russian over there and vice versa. Asset intelligence, you can create parent-child relationships between items and you can do filtering on those parent-child relationships. The use of the same network adapter for PXE-initiated deployments. So the scenario here is you might be in an environment where you have Microsoft Surface or other tablet-type devices, and the vast majority of those don't have Ethernet connectors on them. So you get an Ethernet adapter or a dongle. So I go ahead and plug that dongle into my first tablet I'm imaging. I do a PXE boot on it. I image it up to Windows 10. All is great. I then take that Ethernet dongle and move it to my next tablet and do the same thing, and now my ConfigMan console shows one tablet instead of two because of the fact that they have the same MAC address. So now you can go in there and enable a feature to allow you to register those MAC addresses so they're not treated as duplicates and they would appear as multiple different clients that you really want as opposed to one because of the duplicate MAC address. Task sequencing, steps to help you convert from BIOS to UEFI in an upgrade process. If you're doing a build and capture scenario, the prepare ConfigMan client for capture task sequence step actually removes the ConfigMan client. Previously, it would just do a sysprep on that client instead of removing it. The client Pier cache is a new feature, and I kind of mentioned that a couple slides ago. This is a pre-release feature, which means you have to turn it on after consenting specifically, and this lets your configuration manager clients, a set of them anyway, become content sources for other clients. So you would create a client setting to those devices those clients that you want to be peer servers in essence, and deploy this setting to them. And then when those peer servers download content, they can announce that content as being available locally. So when another client, possibly on the same subnet, does a query for content, they would see this peer source that has that content, and they could pick that as well as any other distribution point that was available. When you're creating automatic deployment rules for software updates, you could now create filtering as a ADR feature on the content size. So you could say only automatically download this content if it's less than a specific size, or maybe greater than a specific size if you want. The product group introduced another pre-release feature called the Cloud Management Gateway. And this would be a replacement for the internet-based client management technology for managing clients, configuration manager clients through the internet. It uses Microsoft Azure technology as the connection between these clients on the internet and your local on-premise infrastructure, or could be in the cloud with the Azure support. Lots of new compliance settings for multiple different operating systems, some Windows-based operating systems as well as mobile device operating systems, and a bunch of changes or updates to the mobile device management features of Configuration Manager. Okay, so that was all the old versions of Configuration Manager Current Branch. Now, again, like I said, I've got 8 or 9 slides here on the features in 1702. So let's talk about those, and I'll do one big long demo after that, and then we'll go through the questions that you guys are submitting. So first thing is, I kind of referenced this way back in 1602, that the product group has deprecated or removed support for Windows Server 2008, as well as Windows Server 2008 R2 as site systems. The one exception is they still do support Windows Server 2008 and Windows Server 2008 R2 as distribution points, but not management points or software update points or site servers. Now, if you want to remain on a build prior to 1702, such as 1610, Windows Server 2008 R2 is still supported, not Windows Server 2008. In 1702, a Windows Server 2008 R2 box could be both a DP as well as an SMP, a state migration point. SQL Server 2008 R2 support has been deprecated. Again, you can still use it on builds prior to 1702, but as of 1702, you have to be beyond SQL Server 2008 R2, so one of the supported SQL Server versions. And the same thing at Windows XP Embedded. It's no longer supported as of 1702. Okay, now new features. This first one is very cool. I talked about in 1511, one of the great ways of getting rid of secondary sites was by allowing you to put management points in your boundary groups and managing the client's access to management points through boundary groups. You can now do the same thing with software update points. So this should, for the vast majority of people, provide all the incentive and feature support necessary for you to get rid of secondary sites. Now, one point of caution here is that there's no fallback configuration yet like you have distribution points. So when I talked about 1610, I talked about the fact that you could control in number of minutes how long you wanted clients to access their local DPs before they tried to fall back to other DPs. You can't do that with software update points yet. You can put them in a boundary group so clients will use them by default if they're in that same boundary group. But if you have those failure scenarios that we talked about earlier with the on-demand switching of software update points, you'll either have to do the on-demand switching feature or allow it to fail over automatically based on the 2-hour failover cycle. And again, I'll show you what this looks like in the demo coming up. Some improvements to in-console searches. So now when you're doing an in-console search, you could turn on an option to show you the path of where this object is found in the product. If you move searches between nodes, it will retain your search text between your searches and nodes. You can now directly provide feedback to the Configuration Manager product group from the Configuration Manager console. So from the ribbon, there's a feedback option, or from the context menu, in other words, right-click menu on navigation node items, you can have a feedback option. And those will take you directly to the user voice area for Configuration Manager. And I'll show you what this looks like in the demo coming up shortly. A pre-release feature called the Data Warehouse Service Point. So that might sound familiar to you. If you're familiar with Service Manager has a data warehouse. Well, the Configuration Manager product group decided to go ahead and create their own data warehouse service point. And this data warehouse service point gives you a technology to provide long-term offline storage for Configuration Manager data. So taking some of that data you want to maintain for historical or maybe regulatory governmental requirement purposes, but move it out of your Configuration Manager database so it's not bloating the database. It also provides a half-dozen reports that specifically look at data in the data warehouse service point. So again, that's a pre-release feature you have to turn on and then enable if you want to. Content library cleanup tool. So this is kind of cool. I was doing this presentation at the local user group here in Seattle area a few weeks ago, and one of the members there said he used this, and he actually recovered 60-some gigabytes of free space off of one of his distribution points that had orphaned content. So every once in a while, it's possible for content to be orphaned on a DP. That means left on a DP when it's been removed from Configuration Manager. And this tool allows you to find this content and then remove it from your distribution points. They've added an OMS connector, so Operations Management Suite connector for OMS log analytics to the Microsoft Azure Government Cloud. The Pier cache feature we talked about in 1610 has had some enhancements to it so that a Pier source will not announce itself having content if that Pier source is in low battery mode, has high CPU utilization, has high disk queue utilization, or has no available connections to it. It also provides 3 new reports around Pier cache and content in the software distribution-content folder. You now have the ability of designating and controlling the behavior of what's termed as blocking programs when you're trying to run an application deployment. Now this is a pre-release feature, and I'll show you how to enable and use this. But basically what it allows you to do is to specify on a deployment type for an application programs that you consider to be blocking programs to prevent you from running this deployment type. And again, I'll demonstrate that for you. The deployment of Office 365 settings, updates, as well as applications from the Office 365 Management Dashboard. The completion of the support for Windows 10 Express updates as of 1607 of Windows 10. Hardware inventory will now automatically report whether or not each client is starting up via UEFI or not. You can disable that if you don't care about UEFI or you know everybody's doing it, but it does report that by default. If you're an OSD person, pay attention. These next two slides are all updates on OSD. If you're not an OSD person, you can maybe take a 5-minute snoozer if you want to. But lots of changes in OSD. So as you know, you can install applications as part of your task sequence. Well, in the past, your install applications task was limited to, that step was limited to 9 applications. Now it's been increased to 99 applications. And when you're adding in your applications to this install application step in the task sequence, you can now multi-select them. Previously, you had to click the new button, pick an application, click OK, and it would add that individually, and you have to add those in individually. Now you can multi-select applications. If you use standalone media, a couple different things there, you can add additional content types to your standalone media, package, application, software update content, as well as your boot image and operating system image. You can now set an expiration on your standalone media. So you could say that this media is no longer can be used after May 15th of 2017. And you have to get new media that might have a new build that captured with it that has software updates implemented on it, so you're more up to date. If you're in an environment where you have lots of drivers in your driver library for operating system deployment, and I've heard of a customer that has well over 100,000 drivers in the driver library, you might have timeouts when you're doing the auto-apply driver step because of the time it takes to do that plug-and-play analysis and scanning for those and installing those drivers. So now there's task sequence variables you can use to configure timeouts on those steps, on that step. When you're looking at your content for your packages, your applications, and so on, boot images or OS images, it now displays not only the content name or that package name, but also the ID associated with that. So it can be easier tracking that in the console then. It tracks your Windows 10 ADK version and will only allow you to edit the boot image for that specific ADK version. So that's kind of cool. And you can utilize any of the Windows 10 ADK versions, but it will just know what ADK version you have and then allow you to only edit boot images for that same version. You can no longer change the default boot image source path like you used to be able to do. Some additional features. You can now restart a failed task sequence. So the scenario here is that you pop up a UI to the end user, they pick the task sequence, they click next, and the task sequence hangs and eventually fails because maybe some of the required content's not been distributed to a DP yet, or you couldn't get access to the network or whatever it is. So previously you would have to cancel that task sequence, restart the computer back into Pixie, for example, and start all over again. Now you can hit a back button or previous button to go back to the previous page, get that content issue fixed, and then just kick back off again without having to restart everything all over again. You're familiar with the high-risk deployment scenario for task sequences, and it's been there for quite a while, all the way back into the ConfigMan 2012 days. Well, that was for required task sequences for operating system deployment. Well, now you can designate any task sequence deployment as high risk. And so then it will filter out your built-in collections, so you can't use them, and will filter out collections that are custom to have more members in it than a designated number, which is 100 by default, but you can clear that checkbox and still use them. Well, now you can designate a custom task sequence as being high risk. You can also provide customizable messages to the end user via Software Center for your task sequences. You can tell them whether or not the task sequence is going to require a restart, how long it should take, how big the content download is going to be. All those things would appear in Software Center as information to the user, so maybe they decide, okay, maybe I'll wait to a little bit later on before I kick off this task sequence. you'd have a message telling users that they were really going to migrate their applications, their data, and their settings on an OS upgrade scenario, as opposed to the message previously said you were going to lose it when you actually did migrate. You now have the ability of pre-caching deployed available content when you're doing an upgrade operating system package and task sequence. Now, this is a pre-release feature, so you have to turn it on individually, and it only works in an upgrade operating system package with the task sequence that's designated with specific language and architecture. But this would give you the ability of taking all the content that is going to be available to this end user in this new OS when it becomes available, and pre-caching that content for them. So now when the Windows 10 device is up and running, they get all these deployments through policies to the management point, and they want to implement all these. They don't have to wait for the content to get downloaded because it's already been downloaded through this pre-caching process. Lots of updates to mobile device management. A bunch of new compliance settings for iOS platforms. You no longer have to manually select the appropriate version of Android or iOS. You can just say Android iOS, and it will include all versions that are supported. Support for Android for Work. A bunch of changes to volume purchase programs, such as the ability of deploying volume purchase programs apps to devices. Previously, you can only deploy them to users. The support for multiple iOS volume purchase program for multiple volume purchase program tokens. The support for volume purchase program for education for iOS platforms. The ability to deploy your own custom line of business apps through the Windows Store for Business. And the ability of designating applications that you deem as non-compliant for your devices, so that when your device connects up and you do your detection, you find out that this device has one of these apps on it that you deem as non-compliant. You could have it be in a non-compliant state so that it wouldn't be able to get access to corporate email. You can generate alerts in the console when you have at least 20% or some other configured value of your managed clients have an expired endpoint protection antivirus engine. So that would let you be aware or notified when your engine for endpoint protection, that engine itself, is out of date, and take some proactive steps on that. There's been some third parties that have created some device threat monitoring capabilities for your mobile devices, and there's new integration with the ConfigMan console for that. So there's a new dashboard for device threat monitoring. And when you're looking at your devices node, there's a attribute you can view for your device threat status, as well as on the tab in the preview pane, there'll be a new tab there for device threat. And if you're utilizing Windows Hello for Business, you can deploy certificate profiles now, and if your end user needs to implement some sort of action to complete the Windows Hello for Business, they can be notified of that. And then lastly, some cool updates to the updates and servicing feature itself. So in the past, you had to go to the administration workspace, go to the cloud services node, expand it, and there you found updates and servicing. Now they've moved the updates and servicing feature outside of cloud services, so it's a root level node now. By default, you'll only download the most current build available. So let's say you did an implementation of 1606, because that was the last baseline build. So you implemented a brand new 1606 environment, you got it running. Now when the updates and servicing feature would kick in, it would download both 1610 and 1702, because they're both available. And you probably only want the latest build. You don't need to have 1610. So now as of 1702, you're only going to download the most current build, and it will be listed as available for installation. If you want to, previous builds like 1610 would be notified of it in the console to say ready for download, and you could right click and say download this build if you, for some reason, you wanted to only install 1610 as opposed to 1702. It provides the infrastructure to now automatically delete older content. So you have this folder called the Easy Setup folder, where all this downloaded content comes for the updates and servicing feature. And in my environment, I looked the other day, and it's over 10 gigabytes of space now, because I had downloaded 1602 and 1606 and 1610 and hot fixes and now 1702. So it's quite large. So as of 1706 now it'll start cleaning up that old content. So they got the infrastructure there in 1702 to allow you to do that automatic cleanup. Okay, so that's enough. I was going to say enough talking, but I'm still going to be talking here for the last few minutes we have. But let's go look at some of these things live. So let's switch over to the demo environment. And let me go to full screen here. And here you can see up on the ribbon right away, you see the feedback node. So right there you can tell this is 1702 because that's a new feature in the product. If I go to like a navigation menu item and right click, there's the feedback option as well. So this allows me again to send feedback directly to the Microsoft product group for this specific area of the console. And that will launch off the user voice for configuration manager connection there. And we can still go up here and do an about configuration manager. And again, you'll see that it is 1702 and the build number is 8498 if you want to see that. Okay, some other things that are appropriate for you. Right where we're sitting in the Assets and Compliance workspace, you see that's client online status. So you see that my first two clients here, the two above the line, have the online status indicator, being that they have talked to the management point in the last 5 minutes. The bottom 4 clients have not, because they're VMs that haven't been turned on. So you wouldn't see those online. And you don't have to worry about now what the client activity column says, because again, that could be 7 days old for your activity rate. Okay, I mentioned the some of these pre-release features. Let me go show you one. If I go to a custom collection here, like all servers, and go to properties, well, now you see this big, I call it white space, and it's really gray space, but this area right here that's got nothing in it. This is where the server groups feature is going to appear here when I turn it on. So let's go turn that on. So let's go to the administration workspace. And now you see outside of cloud services, here's the updates and servicing feature sitting right here. I don't have to go to cloud services now. And you can see that it tells me I got 1702 installed, which is correct. If I expand updates and servicing and click on features, and I zoom in on my features here, you see that everything above my highlight here is listed as a pre-release feature and is currently turned off. They're all turned off. So if I want to turn on one, like server groups, I would select that feature, right click, and click turn on. However, I can't turn it on because I have not consented to the use of those yet. So to consent to use of pre-release features, I have to go to administration, go to site configuration, go to sites, and then on my sites, I go to the hierarchy settings. And in hierarchy settings, this is where, first off, I have that checkbox that we talked about in 1511 to say clients prefer to use management points in their boundary groups. So you could do that. But also down at the bottom is the consent to pre-release features. So I have to click this checkbox. And again, it's a one-time consent. I don't have to do this every build, and I can't turn it back off. So let me go ahead and consent to using pre-release features. Click OK. Now if I go back into hierarchy settings, you see that that section is grayed out. I can't get rid of it. It's turned on, and I don't have to do it again. Now what I do is go back to those features for updates and servicing feature. And if I want server groups, I right-click, and now I can turn it on. I get a message that says this will turn on or become available the next time I start the console. So I'll turn on that guy. Let me turn on install behavior. So he's turned on. Let me turn on client Pier cache. I'll just turn on a few of these just to show you a few different things in demos. Now what I have to do, I have to close the console and then start the console back up so that it has configuration manager console. It has those features now enabled in it. Okay, so now I'm back in updates or back in assets and compliance. Now I go back to that same custom collection, all servers. Do back to the properties of it. And now where that used to be that white space, I now have the server groups feature. So now let me go ahead and turn that on and click settings. And basically what I'm stating here is that I want all computers in this collection which in this case it shows me I have 3 computers in this collection. I want them to be treated as one entity as far as patching goes. And by default, I'm saying up here with the default option, I'm going to allow 50% of my clients to be offline for patching at one point in time before it moves on to others. Or I could designate a specific number of clients that I want to have patched at a time. Or my scenario, I'm going to go here and say I want to order the specific order of them, and I want my domain controller to be patched first, and I want my site server to be patched last. So now in this scenario, it's going to patch the domain controller using my node, drain, and resume scripts. When domain controller has been indicated as patched properly, then it will move to the member server, and then once it's done, it'll move to primary, and it'll go in that specific order. So that's the server groups feature. It gives me more control over my patching scenario. If I go to software library and I go to an application, so go to an application like the Config Man Toolkit, go to its properties. I then go to the deployment types tab, pick my deployment type, go to edit. Now you have this new tab here at the very top. It says install behavior. I click that tab, and now I can go here and add my blocking programs. Now, you guys all know Notepad never blocks anything. In fact, it's better than Configuration Manager Trace Tool for viewing log files. So I would never really do this in production. However, I could go ahead and, for an example, I could say Notepad as a blocker. So now when I add, when I go ahead and add Notepad to my application deployment type, and now what happens as far as the behavior depends upon whether I deploy this as an available application or as a required application. So in just a moment when this catches up here, okay, now I'll go ahead and do a deploy of this application. And I'll pick my collection, and I already got the content and distribution point. Now if I leave this as available deployment, then when this end user tries to run this application, if Notepad's running, he'll get a message that pops up that says, oh, we can't install this application because Notepad is running. If you want to close it, we can continue on. So that's an available. If I change this to required, I change it to required, now I have this checkbox down here at the bottom. Automatically close any running executables I've specified as blockers. So if I don't select this checkbox, the application would fail because it can't, because the application program's running. If I select the checkbox, then it would automatically close Notepad and allow that application to continue running. So that's a pre-release feature you have to enable, but you can now control that behavior. So that's kind of cool. Another pre-release feature that we mentioned was the client peer caching. So if you go to client settings, and what you would do is create a custom device settings, and you might call this peer cache, and maybe you want to spell it correctly. Select the client cache settings, and then you go here and you would turn on client peer cache. You get a notification that says, hey, these are going to be network sources for clients, and you would then deploy this custom setting to the collection of clients you want to be your peer servers. Then when they download content, they'll again basically announce that content to others so that they can see that content and download it from this peer source server. If we go back to software library and go back to, let's get rid of applications for now. Let's go to operating systems and go to task sequence. Here's my bare metal deployment for Windows 10. If I go to properties for this task sequence, down at the bottom, you can now see there's areas where for Software Center you can designate whether or not a reboot's required, and then how much disk space should be used, and time you expect it to take for this task sequence to run on the client. And this would appear as text to the end user. You can also go to the user notification tab, which is new, and I can designate this as a high risk, high impact task sequence and say use custom text. So now I can go ahead and designate my header text and then 3 different paragraphs of custom text I want to appear to the end user inside Software Center when they're looking at this task sequence. So it gives me, again, a lot of good capabilities there for the management of my task sequencing to the end users. I know we're getting very, very short on time, so I'll just do a couple more things quickly here, and then we'll get back in there and look at you guys' questions, see what we can answer there. Here's that Windows 10 servicing dashboard if you've not seen it. So it gives you these rings to show you your usage and platforms that you have. It notifies you when, look at that, I got 100% of my clients, which I only have one, are going to be expiring soon. And you can scroll on down and it will show you what your life cycle is for Windows 10 different builds. And you can see that the 1507 build is end of life. It's in the red platform. And 1511 has gone into the business ready scenario. Here's the Office 365 management dashboard. I don't have any O365 integrated here, but here you can see the ability of creating an installer for O365 apps, creating an ADR to deploy O365 updates, as well as client settings. If you go to monitoring, go to security, here's a preview of some of the dashboards they have, your endpoint protection status, your software updates, and your device threat protection. But if you expand this, you get individual ones such as software updates. And it gives you some cool data here, again, with the little pop-outs and the rings and the highlights and indicators of your health for software updates without having to go to the software updates node and looking individually at some of your updates. Okay, probably the last thing I'll have time to show you is let's go back to administration, let's go to hierarchy configuration, let's go to boundary groups. So again, this is 1702, but this happened in 1610. So in 1702, you now see there's a new boundary group created by default called default site boundary group with your site code on it. So that gets created for you automatically. So let me go ahead and create a new boundary group, remote site, and let me go ahead and just add one of my DPs in there. But notice when you're adding DPs now, it tells you management points, distribution points, state migration points, and now it has in here software update points. So it tells you can add your software update points to your boundary group. But let me go ahead and add in like my member server in there. Okay, so now I get two boundary groups. So let's say my default boundary group, one I'm working with, is local clients and CHQ. So now I go to properties of it, and if I look at my references, remember there used to be a fast and slow connection toggle here, which I don't have anymore. But now I have this relationships tab. So if I go to the relationships tab, there aren't any built in, but let me do an add, and let me say remote site. And what I'm going to say here is, for remote site, I want to allow, let me go ahead and do a couple of these real quick, and then do another one. Let me go to default site, and I'll say 60. Okay, with this configuration, what's going to happen is the clients that are in my local clients in CHQ boundary group, they're going to, when they're looking for content, they're going to look for content in their local distribution points in their boundary group for 20 minutes. After 20 minutes, then they're going to go ahead and add in any distribution points in this boundary group. After a total of an hour of searching local and then remote site, they'll add in any distribution points in the default site boundary group. So that's the way the new relationships works. And again, you see that you can designate your time frame here on your fallback, and you can even say never fallback if you want to. And here's the software update point, but as you can see, you can't do your timing on that. So it's going to be that automatic failover or the that automatic switch, which I guess I didn't show you that. I can show you that real quick. To do that automatic switch, you go to Assets and Compliance, go to a collection like all servers, right-click, go to Client Notification, and then here's the switch to next software update point. So if you know the software update point that your servers are using has gone down, you can tell it to switch to some other one. That's the manual method of doing that. Okay, that should be enough stuff to keep you guys busy for a while, and we're a few minutes past our time. So let's go back and end this presentation and get to your questions. So All right, so I don't have time to go through these slides, which I knew from my experience on Tuesday in the U.S. as well as Australia that I wouldn't get to these, but technical previews are really cool things to implement locally. They give you a glimpse into what's coming in the future, and I had a couple of slides here on updates that happen in tech previews between 1610 and 1702, updates that didn't make the 1702 product, as well as updates that happen in Tech Preview 1703 and 1704 as things you might see coming in 1706. But again, I don't have time to show you that. So just a quick summary. System Center Configuration Manager is fantastic. It's my favorite product. That's why I'm still working with it after 20 some years. I think it's great, and Current Branch is absolutely fantastic. So I would highly recommend you get up on the Current Branch technology, and the updates and servicing feature makes it really, really simple to keep Current Branch up to date. So you really want to be there if you can. And then again, if you have the opportunity, implement a tech preview site. They're really cool to play around with and get familiar with what's coming in the future. All right, Cireson community, if you're not familiar with that, this is our own internal, I'll say kind of a mini TechNet forums, but it's only around System Center. So you can ask questions on pure System Center technologies like Configuration Manager, or on the Cireson technologies like the Configuration Manager console. You can go in there and request features, not for Configuration Manager, but for our apps, for Config Manager or Service Manager. But you'll find you'll find Cireson employees like myself out there trying to respond to people, or other community members out there trying to help out. So it's a free site to go to, and you can go to community.cireson.com and join there. And then again, if you're interested in looking at any of the free products we have, you can go to cireson.com and go down to the free community solutions, and you'll find the 4 free apps we have for Configuration Manager there, as well as information on the Cireson portal for Configuration Manager if you want to play around with it or get more information on it. All right, with that, let's go ahead and finish out our time. I know I'm well past my hour allotment, and some people have had to drop off already, and I understand that, but I'll hang around here for a while longer answering questions you guys have. So if you guys do have any questions, go ahead and punch those into the questions panel right now, and there are a few there. So let me go ahead and tackle what I can. So, question, for 1606 or 1610, is IPU OS, in-place upgrade, OS 2008 R2, site server directly to server 2016 possible? You mentioned in-place upgrade to server 2012. You almost caught me on the IPU there. So the product group has, I believe they've recently announced the in-place upgrade support to go to Windows Server 2016. So I know they hadn't as of the release of 1610 initially, but I've been told that they have released the support now to go from up to Windows Server 2016 as an in-place upgrade of your site server's operating system. Again, it's only the site server, it's not your other site systems. Unless that's changed, which I've not heard of. I know they were doing the site server first, so that should be all taken care of now. All right, let me get to the next question here. Does the client Pier cache have the option to limit the network usage when downloading the content from a DP, protect a WAN link from being filled by Config Manager content or download traffic? And it does not. It does not. It's not nearly as intelligent of a solution as you would find from some of the third parties like Adaptiva with their OneSite or 1E with their Nomad technologies. They have a lot more bandwidth throttling capabilities here. So it does not have that intelligence yet. So it's purely just an announcement across the wire, broadcasting, hey, I've got this content, and you download it across the wire, but there's no management of that. Please share your presentation. As I mentioned, the recording will be posted up to the Vimeo site, so vimeo.com/Team Cireson, and that'll be posted up there probably tomorrow. We'll see. If not, check for it early next week. But I believe the one from the U.S. I did the other day is already up there. As far as the actual slides, I don't know if we post them anywhere, but I can check on that, and if so, we can post those. So, and Klaus mentioned he's going to see me at Ignite, and hopefully I will be there. Not been told if I'm been selected as a speaker or staff or anything yet, but I'm hoping so. All right. Marcin's asking, can I show an example of the upgrade Windows 10 task sequence with biased UEFI switch? There's actually, if you go look at the documentation on that feature, the documentation has a ton of different actions you have to go through to get that conversion done. So it'd be too long of a demo here to do in the time frame that I have. So I won't be able to show you that, but just go look in the configuration manager documentation on the docs.microsoft.com and go to the configuration manager section, look for that operating system deployment and that, or you can go to the what's new and go to the what's new for 1610 and it will take you directly there and it will take you to that documentation. But yeah, they have quite extensive documentation there, including screenshots for that. So that's going to be your best way of getting that info. So James is asking, are you going to be able to see the tech preview slides when the presentation is emailed to us later? I didn't know we emailed presentations to people. If we do, then yes, but nobody's ever asked me for my presentations before when I've done webinars in the past, so I'm not aware that we make those available. If we do, then certainly. If not, then maybe I need to work on getting these guys to set up a tech preview presentation for us. I actually did one at Experts Live in Australia, talking about why would you want to have a technical preview site, the benefits of it, and then I'm going through the different features of it. So maybe I'll make a request to have us do one of those presentations here as well. But if there's a way of making the slides available, then sure, you'd be able to have access to those. I have no problem at all with that. So Philip's asking, does the Pier cache in any way replace Adaptiva to a certain extent? So Adaptiva or 1E solution, or if there's any others out there, it technically you could consider it a competitor because it's doing the same basic functionality, but as I mentioned, they're going to have a lot more intelligence and controls over the bandwidth scenarios and configuration options than the configuration manager solution has. So again, the native solution here, if I go back to my demo environment just to show you again real quickly, there's not a lot to it in the current iteration of it. So all you can do is go to client cache and you obviously can turn it on. It tells you that you're turning on. You have to make sure you have firewall rules in there, but you basically get a set, once you turn it on for your sources, you get to set your broadcast port and whether or not you want to use HTTPS or not, and then the port for downloading. So that's really it. Again, there's no real controls over the bandwidth utilization or scheduling or anything else that some of the third-party vendors would have. So if you need those type of controls, then yeah, you'd want to stick with your Adaptiva or your 1E solutions. If you just want a free solution, because this is in the box with Configuration Manager, again, it's a pre-release feature, then you might want to look at this, at least play around with it in your lab environment. And I guess I didn't show you this, but now that you've got it enabled, if you go to the monitoring workspace, go to distribution status, you now have the client data sources dashboard, which will show you what your data sources are and how many distribution points you have and how many Pier cache sources you have, and then clients that have accessed content from distribution points versus your Pier sources. And then again, as I mentioned, in the software distribution reporting scenario, software distribution content, they've added these 3 reports down at the bottom for Pier cache rejection based on, again, conditions such as high CPU or low battery mode and so on. So they're getting there, but they're not quite there fully yet. So I don't know if they plan on making a full solution that would compete with some of those third parties, or if they're going to leave it as an introductory type solution for those that need all those extra bells and whistles or not. So Lars is asking, when can we default change the software center from the tile to list view? Oh, I didn't show you that. That's a good point. And if you go to your client settings again, you go to computer agent, you have the ability here, obviously, of changing your organization name that's set there, whether or not you want to use the new software center. But yeah, there's not an option to, by default, use the tile view versus list view. So if you want to see that, if I go to Software Center and load Software Center, here you see the indicator that says, hey, I got 3 new applications. And then you see the new indicator on those. And I'm obviously in the tile view right now. You get the big thumbnails. If I go to the list view, you can see it's got a little bit different indicator there. But yeah, I don't know that if or when they plan and allow you to change this by default to one view versus the other view. If you haven't requested that, that'd be one of the things I would go to the user voice for Configuration Manager and request that. My guess is it probably already has been requested. I know they've been enhancing Software Centers. You can see the last few builds, and they do have some more things I know they plan on doing with that, but they're not all the way there. Like that logo that I mentioned, you have to have the Intune subscription. I know they plan on letting you put a company logo bitmap in there just in Software Center without having to have Intune integration. But I would go to user voice for Configuration Manager and look to see if there already is a user voice item submitted for defaulting list view versus tile view in Software Center, and then if not, create one. If so, then vote for it to raise it up to priority scale. Okay, the question, how long does content stay in the client Pier cache? It uses, there's no additional technologies there to manage client cache. It uses the same features and technology that it would use without being a Pier source. So you would have to, you'd probably want to go in there if you wanted to keep that content in cache, you'd want to do the persist content in client cache option. By default, it would be, as I remember correctly, it's been a long time, but I think it's 24 hours after the content's been used by the local computer. It's marked as tombstone, so it can be removed if that space is needed for something else. So if you do want to keep it in there, then what you'd want to do is on your content, you'd want to click an option that says persist content in client cache, and then obviously increase your cache size, which you can now start doing as part of those same client settings that we looked at. Nicholas is not convinced about me using Notepad instead of CM trays for log files. As you guys know me, I'm a firm believer in Notepad for looking at my log files. Every once in a while I will use CM trays, but primarily when I'm doing a presentation, I don't want you people ragging on me for I'm using Notepad. But I do prefer Notepad over CM trays. And it's a long story behind that, but we'll leave it at that. So sync policy for machine user policy, where to set up. Okay, I think that you mean in Software Center. Did I close that out? Here it is, Software Center. If you're meeting Software Center, you would go to Options in Software Center, go to Computer Maintenance, and then down here is the sync policy button. So, so the end user, when they're in Software Center, just goes to Options, and then there's sync policy, and that will, as it shows you here in the tooltip, it does both the user and machine policy retrieval and evaluation cycles. So if that's not what you meant, go ahead and respond back to me and let me know that, and I can show you something else. But that's, I think, what you're implying there. There you go, Theo. Theo recently switched to using Notepad as well instead of CM trays because it makes you lazy and miss errors. So one of the things I don't like about CM trays is that it highlights everything where it has the word warning or error for you, and it gives you a false sense of, oops, something really went wrong. When it's just, anytime it has a word error in a entry, it's going to mark it, even if it's a, like you do an upgrade, you see a lot of red happening in there because it has error indicators, but it's just looking for a file that says error or a error condition or something, and it marks it. So yeah, that's one of the things. Can you run the sync policy action remotely from the admin console? Certainly, and that's been there for a while. So actually way back in the ConfigMan 2012 days, you just go to a device collection and you right click, go to client notification, and here's download computer policy and here's download user policy. So they're two separate actions, but yeah, just go to a device collection or user collection appropriately, and then you initiate the appropriate action. And you can see as the different builds have come out, they've added multiple more of those right-click actions here. So it's getting less necessity for those right-click tools to add into your console, because they're putting, here's your heartbeat discovery, software inventory, which you really shouldn't use, hardware inventory, evaluate your applications or software update deployments, again, to switch to the next software update point, and then evaluate your device health attestation for Windows 10 devices. All right, let me look here. I think I've gone through all the questions that are there in the list right now. So we are 20 minutes past our time. I'll hang here for another moment and see if anybody else pops up with any questions. A good number of people have already dropped off because we're well past the time. They had meetings or whatever else to go to. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and then I will, oops, okay, I got another question coming in apparently. So I guess I'll leave the recording going for another moment then before I close it so we get any additional questions. But so yeah, I'll give you a second there, Marcinda. Go ahead and write your question. But again, this is being recorded, and again, I'll stop the recording momentarily. I'll get this converted, then sent over, uploaded to our site, and then they'll get it uploaded to the Vimeo site probably later on today. If not tomorrow, it should be available. So it might be Monday for you guys, given the fact you're 8 hours ahead of me here in the West Coast. And thank you all. If you are going to drop off, thank you all for taking the hour plus out of your busy days to listen to me ramble on for a period of time. I greatly appreciate it. Hopefully you found it beneficial, and from some of the comments coming in here, it sounds like people did, which is always great to hear. Again, if you need anything from us, you have my email address on the front slide, wally.mead@cireson.com, or you can email Cireson directly at team@cireson.com. You can always go to our Cireson website and find out about our technologies, including that configuration manager web portal if you want to look at it and get any hooked up. There is again, an office over in the UK for Cireson, so you got local resources there to help you out. So okay, so there's a request here. You have a site with 1,500 clients. When I deploy an app to, so things are moving on me. I guess I need to pause this. I'm kind of like a trace you can do. When I deploy an app to a certain collection, on some clients it shows almost immediately in Software Center, and some others an hour default time. Yeah, that just depends upon where the clients are in their local cycle. Not all clients sync at the same time. So it's going to be that 60-minute cycle from the time that the configuration manager client agent last started up. So you actually want that. You want that randomized period of time, so you're not hitting all 1,500 clients in your case, hitting the management point for the policies at the same time, although policies are very small on the network. Or think about an environment where you have hundreds of thousands of clients and you happen to deploy something to all systems, which you should never do, but you don't want to have all those clients hitting the management point at the same time, or hitting the distribution point to get the content if it's a required deployment. So you do want that randomization. So it would be based off of the client's last start of the CCM exec or SMS agent host service. So that sounds like it's normal. Theo has a massive site and planning to upgrade from 2012 R2 to N-1. 10 primary, 40 secondaries, 1,500 EPs. Any possible tips or possible issues you're aware of? There's lots, as there are lots to consider. Yeah, there are lots of things to consider when you have an environment of that size. You certainly do have a lot to consider. Again, very likely you'd be able to get rid of some of those secondary sites that you have, given the management point controls and the software update point controls now inside your boundary groups. The goal from the product group is to reduce everybody down to a single standalone primary site. Now, they're not quite there yet with some of the scalability stuff for some really large companies, but for the most part, most people can get down to a single primary site as far as scalability and performance, and again, the access to the distribution points, management points, software update points by boundary groups. But so certainly I would go reading as much information as available out there. There's, I know, there is a hands-on lab that I wrote on TechNet Virtual Labs on migration, so it should still be there. So I'd go through to practice that to see how to do a migration. Now it was going not to current branch, it would have been migrating from 2007 to 2012, but it'd be the same type of scenario if you want to do a migration. If it's an in-place upgrade, it's a real simple thing. just like you had done from 2012 to R2 or SP1. It's the same type of upgrade process that you would go through. But certainly do your test DB upgrade on that, run through the prereq checker ahead of time. I actually did a webinar, I think it was sometime last year, so go up on the Vimeo site for Team Cireson and look for a webinar that I did on moving to Configuration Manager current branch. It probably was about a year ago. I don't remember exactly when, but probably was around a year ago, and I did a demonstration of the upgrade process from ConfigMan 2012 to current branch. Now, again, it wasn't doing 10 primaries with a CAS and multiple secondaries and all those DPs, but just do a lot of reading, looking at presentations, try out the upgrade lab and so on, and that should give you a pretty good idea. Then obviously play around in your lab environment and check the forums as well. Okay, so Marcin's back saying, so even when he clicks the machine policy, etc. So there's also a scenario with the, there also is a scenario where your clients have to register in your site before they can use that right-click download computer policy action, and that should happen within 10 minutes of that client starting up. But outside that, it could be firewall issues that are blocking the ports that you're using. So look at the ports you're using for the client notification feature. And you can, if you're not aware to look at that, that would be in the administration workspace. Go to your site configuration, your sites, go to your site code, go to properties, and then go to the ports tab and make sure that your client notification port is opened up through your firewall, and by default it's 10.123. If you can't do that, then it's going to fall back to HTTP, which obviously has to be open, otherwise your client can't talk, but just make sure your port's available, make sure the client has registered. You'll see that in your log file. So if I go to File Explorer and then Program Files, Microsoft Configuration Manager, Logs, and here you can see I've got trace turned on for a specific reason. But so if you go to BGB server, you'll see in that log file a notification such as right here, total online clients. And it'll say I got one client that's connecting through TCP and one through HTTP. So that means the port's blocked on one of them likely, but the other one is able to get through, so it's having to do HTTP. So that will tell you how many total clients you can hit with those right-click actions through client notification. On a client, you would then look at the, I'll just use my site server as a client. So go to the client folder, which on my site server is, because it's my MP, SMS_CCM logs. It's the client notification, CCM notification agent. And so when it says successfully sent keep alive message, that means it has registered, but you'll see when it does register, here you'll see that it's going in and checking both, and connection to the server was available, and tells you the port 10.123, and then it says successfully sent keep alive. So it has done that. So those are clients. Each client will do that when it is connected up to that service, so you can do that fast client notification channel. So, okay. So even restarting your SMS or agent host service, it's actually going to delay things because of the fact that then that notification channel has to get re-registered, which should be 10 minutes. But that should obviously then get it to pull policy. So unless there's some backlog issue on your management point, which I don't know about. What about the new option to suspend Bitlocker on restart? It's working. Is this working fine and can be used during Windows 10, Windows 7 to Windows 10 upgrades? As far as I know, I've not heard any problems with that option to suspend Bitlocker. And obviously, you do have to do that, suspending Bitlocker on an upgrade, or if you have third-party disk encryption tools, you have to disable those. So, so yeah, everything I've heard, that's working fine. Where can you find the content cleanup tool? It's not part of the console. It would just be in your source files. So it should be, if I go back over to my site here, content library cleanup tool, it should be If I go to my source, here's my site server, and then my tools folder. Let me see if it's sitting in here. I don't see it there, so maybe it's under CD latest. So if you go to CD latest and then go to, I forget the name of it, so this is library. Oh, it's not, don't want to do that. I wanted to do a search here, search local. So let that do its search and see if it finds it up. May not. That is a good question. I'll have to find that for you. So I'll have to find that for you, Lars, and let you know, because I don't remember where they're hiding it now. In there, I would have thought it would have been in data, but or in the tools folder, but I didn't see it there. It should be under CD latest if it's included. I know it's in the tech preview releases, but I thought it was a full release now, but I would have thought it would have been in here. Now maybe it's not called library, maybe called something else, but let me look and see if I can find it, and then I will shoot you a message on when I find that guy, but I would have thought it would have been sitting in there. And content library cleanup, there you go. It does have a library in the middle of it. So go to your installed source, go to CD latest, go to SMS setup, tools, and then the folder is content library cleanup. So there's, oh, there you go. Yep, you found it. Got it. Good, good, good. Okay. Dijon, I think if I hacked your name, I'm sorry about that. Anytime when an offline media is created on configman 1610, the wizard ends in an error message. With that error message, any idea what's wrong? Thanks. No, that error message does not look familiar to me. Sorry. I would go and post that to the TechNet forum and I get one of the guys there in the operating system deployment area to look at that. If not, you can email me that if you want to, and then I can forward that off to some contacts I have and do some research for you and find out for you. But okay, with that, we are a half an hour past our allotted time, so very much like the US session. I'm going to go ahead and close my Q&A panel so I don't get any more questions. I'm stopping the recording now.